Hey guys, Alex here. So we had a question from one of the playtesters in the Discord just about some ways you can get better at using terrain association techniques, meaning basically looking at the contour lines on your topographic map and kind of understanding what those will relate to in the field. And so I wanted to share just some techniques you can use, and they take practice. There's no just kind of like secret answer that you hear once and then you just kind of get it. It takes practice, but I'll show you a way that you can practice and help you get better at the skills. So I'm gonna go to Bravo, and what we're gonna do here is just adjust my station. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna move to a location, and we're only gonna keep tabs on the way. We're gonna keep tabs of where we are along the way, just by using terrain association. So this is an exercise you can do. It's actually some of the training modules that I'm working on include kind of exercises, academic kind of practice exercises like this. So this could be kind of a preview version of some of the stuff you'll be able to do, but that's going to be a while before those are implemented into the game. So for the sake of practice, let's go ahead and, well, I don't need to plot it exactly, but we're at Bravo, which is somewhere right up here. And let's move to this hill, just a random hill. And the what we want to do is along the route, one way you can keep track of where you are is by traveling along an azimuth and counting your pace, right? And it's a good method. It's usually called dead reckoning, but there's times where that's not the best method. There's times where because of the terrain, you might have to be doing a ton of zigzagging, and so your pace count isn't super reliable, your azimuth isn't super reliable, and so you need to kind of couple that with some terrain association techniques, and vice versa. All these things are, it's not one technique to rule them all. You have to use them together, so that in the end what you want is kind of a body of evidence that you can use to determine, I know where I am, or I'm not quite sure where I am. So just for academic purposes, we're not going to use distance and direction at all with our compass. We're just going to be looking at the terrain. So what we'll do in order to identify this hill is we'll first move to this ridge line to where we can see it, and we'll follow it. And along the way, we'll be studying the terrain features and relating them to our map so that we can keep tabs on where we are, even though we're not going to be counting our pace, So, if we did measure, we could see that it's going to be about 800 meters, which is a pretty far movement, right? So we'll just be using terrain association to know when we've gotten parallel with our point, and then also be able to recognize it. Now the difficulty is, let me move to a spot where the shadow's not moving around so much. So the difficulty is we need to recognize this specific hill and not confuse it with another. So you can imagine if maybe we started way over here, come a whole kilometer or something, and we're trying to identify this hill. Well, there's a few, we could take a look at it and look at its general shape and say, okay, it's it's kind of shaped like a thumb, and if all you go off of is just kind of a general hunch of what it looks like, what could happen is you could come to this hill and be looking at it and think that it's the correct one, and then of course you're going to be way off. So you want more than just one clue. You want more than just one terrain feature to read. So let me show you what I mean. So even if you were being a little more careful, if you actually did some measurements here and you said, okay, the kind of main part of this hill is about a little less than 100 meters in breadth, and then we can also see that from the highest portion of the hill which is here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 50 meter gain. So just counting the contour lines, we can see that it goes up 50 meters. So it gives us a sense of how tall it is. And then we might also look and say, it rises 40 meters, rather quickly within the span of about 50 meters. It goes up 40 meters, so pretty steep. But then it slowly kind of tapers off to its highest point, over the course of 100 meters. Then it rises another 10 meters. So that gives you a sense of what this hill is going to be shaped like, how wide it is, how tall it is, how long it takes to reach the tallest point, and then, kind of how steep it is, and then it has this taper. So now we got a good idea of what this hill looks like, and typically you'd even want to, if this is an important attack point that you're using, you'd want to even make notes, 100 meters wide, facing, east to west, and certainly, be as detailed as you feel like you need to be. And, it's looking at it from north to south, it's, and then you type in your measurements, right? So that's the kind of notes you can make to describe, whether this is an attack point or, your control points up there. Those are the sort of notes you can make, taking measurements of a terrain feature. And the important thing to keep in mind is little things like this little divot here, this little bump, that little bump. That's not something you'll be able to, reliably read. You're just looking for kind of the big features of it. What are the kind of what's the overall nature of it? Stuff that is 50 to 100 meters in size that I can unmistakably read. So once we've done all that, then we have a good idea of what this specific hill looks like. But like I was saying, you could, if you made some mistakes and you ended up walking to this hill and you were taking a look at it, much of those details you wrote down would also apply here. It's a little bit different, but when you're reading that terrain in the field and there's trees and all sorts of stuff, it could be very easy to mistake, this hill for that one. So what we want to do is not just read one terrain feature, but try to read as many as we can. Basically gather as many clues as we can. And so what I do is start reading the terrain features near it. Look for the biggest, most obvious stuff. So in this case, I look to the immediate east of it and see, okay, there's a draw. A draw is like a water drainage, basically, right? Where water has flowed and then kind of carved the shape into the land. And kind of the mouth of that draw is about 50 meters. And of course it narrows as it goes up. But the interesting thing about the draw is that it's kind of facing the same way as the hill, except for then it kind of curves into the hill, curves in a little bit westward. So again, I would make some notes here about that, just, it can be shorthand, but just enough that, 20 minutes or an hour later, you can still make sense of your notes. So that's one thing about this hill is it's got this draw on the east side, but this one also has a very similar features, and so does this one. These hills are slightly different. This one's a little more steep, and then it doesn't really have so much of a taper to the top. But that's kind of like really minor details that would be harder to discern. Leaves a little bit of room for error. And so rather than comparing the smallest details of this hill versus this hill, it'd be good to just get more major terrain features, that we can use. So we know what the hill is shaped like. We know what the draw on its east side is shaped like. Let's look at the draws on the west side. And this is interesting because this is quite unique. This one has, coming off of the main part of this hill, or spur really, it's not a hill necessarily, but it's a spur. It kind of has this little mini ridgeline that's kind of poking out, and it's going, parallel to the main ridgeline. And then behind it, we have a Y-shaped draw, and then also consider the measurements here. We can see that this draw is at its wide part, it's almost 100 meters wide, so it's a pretty big area, and then it splits off into a Y. And so those are some more kind of unique things about this piece of land that we can identify. It's got this finger that's going off, and it's got behind that this Y-shaped draw. And of course you do want to make notes about that. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to write notes, but you definitely want to, anything that's important, write it down. And you can go further from there. You can kind of start describing these features over here, and you can also identify important nearby attack points. In this case, we got this big open area. For the sake of certainty and for the sake of time, my plan might just be get to that thing. It'll be easy to find, and then from there, go to your attack point. But for the sake of this demonstration, let's pretend like that's not there. There's just nothing but woods here. So now we know a lot about this area. We know what our hill looks like. We know what the draw, or the immediate features on its east side looks like, or sorry, its west side. We know what the immediate features look like on its east side, and we can see now with all of those clues, that's enough to differentiate it compared to these other kind of spurs and drops that are jutting out, right? Nothing else around here quite has features like that. This one has a little bit of a ridge coming off, but it's not nearly as large, and it's not coupled with that large Y-shaped draw. So that's enough that we now have a picture of this area, and it's pretty unique compared to anything else. There's a much less of a chance that we'll confuse it with some other terrain feature. Okay, so as practice, what we'll do is move from our starting point and get to this hill, which is 800 meters away, and be able to identify it. So along the way, we won't do any, we won't counter pace, we won't follow an azimuth. We'll just walk along this ridge and read the terrain features. And the terrain features will inform us of when we've gotten to our target hill. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so just real quick, I will use my compass just to get basic orientation. That's the ridge, but let's just double check. We are facing south. Okay, so that's got to be our ridge. Let's go ahead and move to it so we can get a clear view. Actually, right here's a good view. So let's go ahead and identify this first feature. So you can see that here we got kind of one kind of bulk of a spur here, and then we also have another one here. And just guesstimating, it looks like kind of the main chunk of that spur is maybe 50 meters wide. I think same thing over here, maybe 50 meters wide. And then in between them, this draw, it seems like kind of the mouth of that draw is also about the same distance, about 50 meters wide. And then it cuts up into them, and it looks like as it's cutting up, it kind of angles just a tiny bit that way. Angles just a tiny bit, that would be east. Yeah, east. So that draw is cutting in just and then kind of just like the shape of a comma a little bit, pointing east. So let's take a look at the map here. Of course, we know we're right here, so we have a good idea of where we are already, but let's just identify those features. So we can see, kind of just the main portion of the hill is, roughly 50 meters, maybe a little more than 50 meters. And then that second bulge that's coming out is, similar. We can also see that it's kind of, imagine if you drew a line, kind of through the main portion of it, the way the contour lines are facing. It's kind of at an angle to where it's almost going perpendicular, it's almost going, perpendicular to us. And that's kind of what we're seeing too, right? It's kind of angled away from us. And then that draw, very subtle, but we can see, sure enough, it does kind of have that little comma shape that we're seeing. We can also see that this first hill on the left, we're right here, we're looking this way, so this is on our left. We can see that first hill goes right up to the highest point pretty quickly, right? How far these contour lines, or how close they are together, determines how steep it is, right? So over the course of, you know, less than 50 meters, it's going up 1, 2, 3, 40 meters. This one's slightly more spread out, especially the further right we look, and we can kind of see that there as well. So now we have a good idea, you know, not just looking at this one spur, you know, not just looking at this one draw, not just looking at this one spur over here, but looking at all of them together. We can kind of, with, you know, pretty good certainty, we can say, okay, we are looking definitely at that terrain feature there. So we have a good idea, you know, that we're somewhere right in here. So now let's go ahead and start moving along the ridge. And once we get past, you know, this last feature that we've identified, we'll start reading the next ones. So once I get past right there and kind of get this next set of terrain features in view, then we can double check. And now if you're doing this for practice, you know, you shouldn't, just don't even worry. You can load into an exercise and just don't worry about getting the control points or the time hack or anything, and just, you can do exercises like this just for practice, because at first you'll be slow, you know, you'll want to write everything down and really sit there and take time and study the terrain. But once you get some practice doing that, you'll start doing it in your exercises. And again, I wouldn't rush it, even if you know, don't get the time hack you wanted. The important thing is you're building skill, and you'll get faster at it. So we've come past that last kind of feature we've identified back here. It's kind of behind these bushes at this point. But now we can see that there's a kind of a broad bowl shape. You know, it looks like it's probably more than 100 meters, right? It's quite a bit bigger than those hills we were looking at, and then it rises up to another spur. So let's see if that makes sense. So the last thing we had looked at was here. We came a little bit further, and now sure enough, okay, here's this big broad bowl shape, and then it rises up to another steep spur, and we can get a sense of how steep it is by, you know, we can see it goes up 1, 2, 3, 40 meters, right? And then it kind of has a little bit of a nub that kind of angles towards us at the end. That might be a little too subtle for us to identify. Yeah, that's probably a little too subtle to identify. But the main thing is we can see that, okay, there is indeed this large kind of bowl-shaped cutout. And then we have another spur. Ooh, bump it into twigs. And then we have this next spur. So this next spur, again, we can get a sense of its size. You can see that kind of the main portion of it is, you know, about 50 meters broad, you know, and then once we go a little further, we're going to see that again there is a drainage, you know, a draw that is cutting into it and doing so where it kind of starts to curlicue eastwards. And we can also see that this draw is, you know, about 50 meters in length as well, or 50 meters in width, and then it goes back, you know, a little over 50 meters. So that gives us a sense of the scale of it. So let's see if we can kind of identify that. So there's the big spur sticking out, and then up here we can start to see that draw. And, you know, we noted the width of it, the length of it, and then also the shape of it, you know, the orientation, which way it's pointing. And to me, it all looks like it's adding up. You can see kind of the mouth of it, basically from where we have the rise of the next uphill portion and the rise of this uphill portion. Looks like it, you know, between 50 and 100, and then it has that curlicue shape that's pointing up and then starts angling westwards. And it looks like it goes back there, you know, a good 100 meters or so. So that's all making sense to me. Now, after you've been, playing this terrain a lot, you won't actually have to sit there and use your protractor to measure every little detail, because you'll just be able to look at it and have a sense. But certainly anything that is important, you'll want to be pretty specific about it. And until you do develop that kind of sense of the lay of the land and the scale of the terrain features, it would be a good idea to, take the extra time to just write it out and really kind of be as detailed as possible. So usually if I'm doing an exercise, I'm not only doing terrain association like this. I would also have an azimuth that I'm following, and even if I'm not counting my pace exactly, I would still be keeping close tabs on kind of, I would look 100 meters. I kind of know roughly what a tree looks like at 100 meters, so each time I get to the next tree that's 100 meters, I kind of just log that in my mind. So terrain association like this is used in conjunction with your distance and direction, your dead reckoning skills. But keeping tabs on the terrain like this as you move is one of the best ways to kind of like you have a GPS. You get a constant reminder of where you are in the world. You don't want to rely completely on just one technique. So here's something. So we've come past this draw now. We're coming up to the next kind of spur that's coming out. And this one is not nearly as steep as the others, right? And then it's kind of angling perpendicular to us. So let's take a look at that. So that was that big bowl. And then we identified this draw. And then we're looking at a hill that's not as steep as the others. And sure enough, we can see, okay, this hill over here, it rises up 40 meters. And right to the highest point, it's pretty consistent rise, right? These are all spaced about the same. But this one, it also rises up 40 meters, but you can see there's a big gap between the, the 90 and 100 meters above sea level. So what that means is it rises up, it's pretty consistently steep, but then to get to its highest point, it's kind of takes more time, right? So it's going to be more of a shallow slope. And so that's what these contour lines are telling us, and that's also what we're seeing. We can see that it rises up pretty steep for a minute, but then to get to its highest point, it's a pretty gradual slope. So that's what we're seeing there. Okay, so far so good. We've identified this area, we've identified this, identified this area, and now we've come here and we've identified this spur as well. So now what we expect to see is a draw that's even bigger and longer than the ones we've seen so far. It's not very much wider. It's, at its mouth, it's about 50 meters wide, but it goes in there quite a bit deeper. And it is also angling slightly westward. So we could even, if we wanted to be really precise about it, see what that, kind of imagine a line drawn through the center of it and see what that is. It's 120, of course, add 5 for the GM angle. So 125 or 126 about. And then so that's just another way we can confirm that is pointing the way we expect. So let's get to that draw, and then we can kind of just look down it with our compass and see if that makes sense. If there's not too much brush in our way. Okay, so kind of have to look pretty closely, but looks like we're kind of looking down it. I'm just looking for any little detail kind of through all the brush, kind of following the ridge line up there. And it looks like this is kind of the right angle. And so we're getting, you know, between 120 and 140. And is that what we determined here? Yeah, more or less between 120 and 140. So that's just another little way we can kind of sanity check ourselves. So now we've, you know, came and identified this draw as well. Now we're getting to some new features. We'll keep going. And again, we have another kind of big spur. This one kind of has some little kind of a 3 heads to it. That's going to be pretty subtle to read, so I don't want to rely on kind of that so much. I just want to read kind of the you know, how big the bulk of it is, the bulk of the feature is, and you can see it's about 150 meters in width. And then similar to this other one, it has a sudden steep rise, but then it takes a long time to get to its highest point. And so so that gives us an idea of what the shape's going to be. It's going to be kind of a steep wall at first, but then it takes a long time to get up to its highest point. And see, like I said, on the map, it looks like, okay, it's got like 3 kind of big bulbous heads, but they're so subtle, that's not something I would want to rely on, you know? I mean, I'm kind of seeing that, but you could easily mistake that for something else. Also, once you get all this kind of down trees and all sorts of brush, that can kind of cover up some features as well. But what we can identify is that the you know, the breadth of this, or the width of it, looks like it could be 100 meters, right? It's certainly twice as big as those other spurs we had been looking at that were, you know, 50 meters. And now, getting beyond this guy, what do we expect to see? Once we get a little ways beyond him, we can see where we come to that big Y draw. Now we're getting close to our target. But what we expect to see is a big, broad draw that's going, angling this way. You know, you can get the actual azimuth if you want, but we can see it's kind of angling. If we're walking down the contours like this, and we're looking off to our left, we expect to see this thing just angling off, you know, you know, what, 15, 20 degrees, whatever, just a little bit off our left hand, and then it goes back in there, you know, good ways, you know, several hundred meters. So it goes in there pretty deep. Excuse me. And then it also, you know, we already measured how long it was and made some notes about that, or how wide it is and made some notes about that. And then we also know that it splits off and makes a fork, right? So once we get down here, we should be able to look back and see that fork splitting off. And then the other important terrain feature that we identified earlier was this kind of ridge that's poking out. And if we go kind of past it, that ridge is gonna block our view right into this drainage. So let's go ahead and see if we can identify all that. Okay, so right there, you can see that it's starting to cut in back there, and then this land is jumping up and already blocking our view already. So let's maybe go ahead and get up on the high ground here and get a better view into there. Okay, so this is, you know, a draw, and it's going at that, you know, that angle that we expected to see. It's kind of just slightly off from the main ridge line, like this, right? So the main ridge line was angled like this, and it's just coming off of it, you know, a good 10 degrees or so. And then, we're standing on it, and we can see that this ridge line kind of walks up towards the hill. And the interesting is that we're on this high point, and then it kind of has a saddle and then goes back up. And I think that's what we're seeing here. We're on this kind of high point here, and then it has a little bit of saddle and then goes back up. So I think that's what we're seeing there. And that's pretty subtle, it's not quite enough to go off of yet. But if we look in here, we can see, I think this is our Y-shaped guy here, so I can't quite see the other arm of it yet. I think it's hidden behind this hill, but we can see there that kind of turning back the air is kind of suggesting that this is that Y-shaped draw. And so just to confirm that, I'll go up here on this hill and then make sure that we are indeed looking at that Y-shaped draw. Okay, so now we have now we have a better view of this draw here, and we can see, yeah, definitely it's splitting into that Y shape. Based on where we started from, we know that the orientation of it makes sense, right? It was started out kind of going off just a little bit of an angle from the main ridge line, then it comes here and it splits. And if you really want to confirm that these splits are going the way you expect, you can of course get the azimuth of them, and then kind of get yourself in a position so you can confirm that. But since this is a pretty big major feature here, and there isn't really anything else like it around here, I feel safe in assuming that we are looking at this specific feature on here on the map and not confusing it with another one. And the reason I have that certainty is because we've been keeping tabs along the way. So there hasn't been a stretch of 5 minutes where it's like, oh well, we're not really sure exactly where we are. The whole way down here we've known exactly where we were, and then so this is the next feature. It looks like it makes sense, so with some certainty we can say, okay, we're like definitely right here. And so now all we gotta do is drop down, move past this feature, and then I think so long as we can confirm that the far side of this hill shows that feature that we also identified, then we can definitely 100% say, okay, we are at our hill, and we know where we are. So I'll move back down, to that little bump, and then come down until we're even with the next spur. And we'll take a look at the draw, and if it adds up, then we can say definitely we know where we are and we're at our target. Now, it might seem like overkill. I mean, you might be saying already, like, well, yeah, we know where we are, definitely, because we've been keeping tabs the whole way. But the thing is, if you kind of stop being this careful and confirming your position, as often and as using as many different methods as possible, just 5 minutes later, you could end up being pretty confused. Because you kind of lost tabs of your position for a little bit. Let's see if we can get around this. No, hold on. Okay, just get through this brush real quick. Okay, let's just come back here just far enough that we can see. because I'm just making sure we're not getting disoriented. I'm kind of looking back where I came from and just keeping that in my mind, so we're still kind of even with that big draw that we had identified. Let's find that one real steep hill. Yeah, there's that real steep hill we were up on, and then that is the kind of that ridge that comes off and slowly climbs up. And now some things like, you know, this little bump, and then it kind of has a little saddle and then a little bump again. That's the kind of minor thing. It might kind of be on a map a little bit, but it would be pretty hard to identify. So again, I'm looking for the big major things. So I want to get around to the far side of this next spur and look for that draw that's on the east side of it, or sorry, the west side. Yeah, the west side of it. And if it looks like we expect, then I feel pretty confident that this is definitely our objective. So this is that, you know, that kind of long finger that's coming off, and it kind of blocks our view into this valley back here. Well, it's not a valley, but it's kind of like a valley. But sure enough, it's kind of making that wall, and it goes for, it looks like, you know, it's kind of the main portion of it looks like it goes for nearly 200 meters. So, you know, from the end of it down there to where we hit our next draw should be about 200 meters. So, you know, pretty major feature. It looks like that might be our next draw up there, just judging from the thick brush in there, but let's see. Nope, that's not it yet, and that's just some brush, but yeah, certainly we haven't gone 200 meters. So remember, back there, come in here, it's okay. Now there's a lot of brush, so we'll have to be pretty careful. Let's see if we can get a view into there. If not, we might have to get up on top of that hill. But certainly we've come past this spur. And we can see kind of the next one down there. This must be our draw, but we don't have a great view into it. We can definitely tell that it's a pretty broad mouth. And then that next spur eastward is kind of a little further back, so we can see that this one over here is coming out, you know, this far, and then the kind of bulk of this next spur is pushed back a further ways, and it looks like it rises more gradually. It's not quite as steep. That's kind of what this terrain looks like to me. So since I actually see well, I was gonna say there's a clear path, let's just climb that one, but let's see if we can get up on our actual target hill here, or what we believe is the target hill, and get a better view into that draw and make sure it is like the one that we identified, you know, early on. And so, but now you know, you're probably pretty redundant. You get a sense of the big idea is we're just trying to read kind of major terrain features, try to measure them carefully, pay attention to the, you know, close details about, you know, which way the topology is, you know, facing, how wide features are, how long they are, and then also not just using one but using several, so that we don't make the mistake of, you know, looking at some hill, looking at some ridge, and saying, oh yeah, that's definitely mine because it's shaped a certain way, but then it turns out you mistook it for, you know, just some other one that is similar. So you got to keep in mind, you know, am I going to be able to read you know, the subtlest little details, and you know, especially if I'm tired, you know, it's been a long exercise and I've been making a lot of tough decisions, or maybe I'm a little bit frustrated because I'm a little bit feeling kind of lost and not confident. You know, that's all going to affect your ability to notice little details. So you don't want to rely on, you know, some kind of super secret ninja, you know, skills where like I can look at a pebble and say, oh yeah, that's, you know, that's what I'm looking for. You want to look for big, identifiable things, and as many of them as you can identify. The more clues you have, the better. So now we're looking into this draw. We can see, okay, we kind of had a sense of how big the mouth was. We can see it goes back there a good ways, and it does have that curly Q shape, but I kind of forgot how far back it goes. Let's just confirm that. And from the mouth of it, it does go, you know, almost 150 meters. And that kind of looks like what we're seeing here. You know, it goes back there pretty good ways. And it has that curly Q shape. So taking into account that with what we saw over here, and then we kind of measured the distance of the front kind of wall of this spur that it's creating because it has this offshoot, I feel pretty confident to say, yeah, we're like right here on this hill now. So yeah, I think that concludes this demonstration. We've traveled from the Bravo start location 800 meters. We didn't count our pace. We didn't hardly use our compass at all. Just read the terrain and related it to our map. And pretty much the entire way, we had a pretty good degree of certainty about where we were. So that worked out pretty well, even though it seems really slow, and especially when you're first learning to do this, it will be slow. But once you've got a bit of practice with this, you'll be able to just pretty quickly look, and once you know this terrain as well, you'll just be able to kind of look pretty quickly and confirm things. Confirm that the terrain you're seeing on the map lines up with what you're seeing in the world. And then in those cases where you're like, hold on, that doesn't feel quite right, that's when you'll get out your protractor and really kind of measure things and be more precise about it. And then once you do that, you'll know, like, okay, it's correct, or something's wrong. I'm not right. I'm not where I think I am. And so that's terrain association techniques. Obviously, if you're a beginner, or if you're kind of dusting off the cobwebs, stick with the Alpha, Bravo, and then Charlie somewhere in here, and maybe the Delta exercises too, because these offer you several really good attack points. You got these open areas, you got the water, and so the safest thing to do in this case would have probably just been beeline it, bump into one of these large open areas, and then from there you can do a smaller movement out to your control points or attack points, whatever. Sometimes even if it's a longer distance, if you go with something that's dead simple, anybody could recognize it, that's always good to go with safety. But if you are getting into some of the more advanced areas, any of the exercises that take place down here in like Echo, Golf, and Hotel and stuff, are in these areas, pretty much the only way to get around is by reading the terrain. So you'll definitely want to kind of start practicing these skills. They won't just happen by accident. You do have to kind of make a concentrated effort at it. But once you do, I think if you get pretty good at reading the terrain here, pretty much this whole map will start to feel pretty easy to you. because I did. So this is basically satellite data from the Sandhills game land. That's where I did LANDNAV. Except for in real life, there would be very few contour lines because it's a really flat area. So what I did was I kind of punched up the verticality of it so that rather than there, from here all the way to here, there just being like two contour lines because it's almost flat land, I made it to where there's a lot more terrain that you can read. And I mean, I didn't do that just to make life easier. I also did that so that it'd be more fun, because just following distance and direction forever gets kind of boring. So So yeah, this is a type of terrain that is really conducive to using terrain association techniques. So I would definitely advise that you practice those a lot, and use the use pace count and following an azimuth in conjunction with terrain association. No matter what type of terrain you're doing land nav on, you always want to use as many clues as possible to keep tabs on where you are. That's what this little excerpt from the Army FM is all about. You want to know where you are on the map and on the ground at all times in every possible way. So, give yourself every advantage, even if it seems like it's kind of slow and takes longer to kind of study the terrain, study your map like that. In the end, it will save you time because you won't get lost. So hope this helps. And exercises where you do stuff like this specifically will be added in as instruction modules in the future. But that's gonna be a little while, so hopefully this will be helpful for some of you guys in the meantime. Okay, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.